My microphone wasn't on. All right, I'm starting to talk now. Unless I hit it halfway, God knows. I do talk with my hands. Diencephalon. So if the recording is blank for the first couple minutes, you'll know why. Thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus. Enclosed by what? Third ventricle. How many ventricles do we have? 4 ventricles. What are they? I know, they're not in the notes in front of you. I'm asking you, you should have this stored in your brain. 2 lateral ventricles. 3rd and 4th ventricle. Very good. So, on page, again, 440, we see a nice picture of the regions we are going to discuss in the diencephalon. So 80% of it is something called the thalamus. And what's the thalamus doing for me? A lot of these places are switches, roadways and switches. They're going to receive information, send it to where it needs to go. A lot of them are white matter. So nuclei project, some processing happens here, but they're basically projecting information to different areas of the cerebral cortex. Now, again, confusing as heck, but here's the thalamus. If you were going to be a brain surgeon, you would have to know what each of those little groups did, and you would have to know them all by name. But because you're just here in this class and you're going to pass anatomy and physiology, what do you need to know? What's here on the outline. So there's different mediators in these different groups or different nuclei groups in the thalamus. And we're going to mediate things like sensations, motor activities, cortical arousal. What's that? Hopefully some of your cortexes are aroused right now. Some of you have cortical stupor. What? Awareness and arousal, kind of the same thing. Being aware of what's going on, aware of your surroundings. Sending information, that aware information, for the learning process and the memory process. So again, we see a whole bunch of colors here. We see a whole bunch of names. And the thalamus has a bunch of different nuclei that are going to help with this processing. You with me? So understand thalamic function. Basically understand where we're directing information. Emotions, visceral function. Helps direct motor, memory, sensory integration. Learning, memory is a big one for these guys. Who's next? The hypothalamus. Now the hypothalamus is a very busy little midbrain area. We're going to talk about the hypothalamus a lot. Second semester, every time I say, well, who's responsible for that? If you say the hypothalamus, most of the time you're going to be right. Because it's very, very important. Again, central brain region. Contains nuclei located in little areas called mammillary bodies. And this tells us where they are. Paired anterior. And then we also have olfactory relay going through this region of the brain. Where's your olfactory receptors? Point to them. Behind that, yes? And what's right behind that? In this region, yes? So information is coming in and going through those relay stations in the hypothalamus. It hangs by a little stalk called the infundibulum and connects to the pituitary gland. So I shouldn't say the hypothalamus hangs, the pituitary gland hangs. That's the hypothalamus's connection to the pituitary gland. It's called the infundibulum. That connection, we're going to see later when we talk about the endocrine system, is extremely important Because one of the things the hypothalamus does to help regulate body function, besides using its nervous system function, is actually making hormones that are going to help regulate body function. Again, we see the same kind of setup. If you want to be a brain surgeon, know them all and know what they all do. But what does the hypothalamus do in general? Well, it's going to control a lot of autonomic nervous function. What's that mean? Autonomic nervous function. Stuff that kind of happens automatically, thank goodness, that we don't have to think about. Like heartbeat, pupil size, digestive motility, blood pressure. We also see there's a connection between the hypothalamic nuclei and the limbic system. And that connection is going to produce things like emotions. Your perception of things that are nice and your perception of things that are not so nice. Fear, rage, drives biological rhythms. You have a certain rhythm that you follow, day and night. Yes? Most of us are awake during the day and we sleep at night. And those rhythms are controlled with the help of the limbic system along with the hypothalamus. Regulates things like body temperature. Regulates hunger and satiety. What's satiety? Feeling full. So after you ate the whole refrigerator this morning for breakfast, at some point you're going to say, whoa, that's enough. So unfortunately, this whole control is not very good. It takes quite some time. Where do you get messages from that you're full? The mirror. The table, the empty table. It's like, I ate that all. Sometimes we've done this. I do this all the time. That's why I am the petite size that I am today. But you'll get home, you're hungry. What do? You eat, and you're like, oh, and I'm making dinner. And I'm eating crackers and whatever the heck I can get my hands on because I'm so hungry. And if you eat it too fast, what happens? Yeah, you don't get the message for a while. Stretch receptors in your stomach. Actually, it's when we start to get changes in the circulatory system, those are some of our messages. That takes a while to happen. By the time it happens, what have I done? Cleared out the whole cabinet, yes? Or, in your case, ate all the food in the refrigerator. So that message that we receive from the hypothalamic regions is a little slow. Regulates hunger in response to nutrient blood levels. So it takes a while for some of those nutrients to get there. Also some different hormones. Water balance, thirst, also regulated by the hypothalamus. Again, we see the picture on page 442 of all the different nuclei and what they do for a living. Regulates sleep and awake cycles. This is your biological clock. So different chemicals are going to help you become sleepy. Anybody know what one of those chemicals is? Well, tryptophan in the turkey makes you kind of sleepy. How about melatonin? Okay. Anybody having problems sleeping? You want to know my trick? I just learned it. I don't know if it works. I just started doing it, but it's a cheap, well, not really cheap. It's kind of expensive. But it's a non-chemical way to help get your melatonin levels in sync. What was that? That was a big drop. Cherry juice. Tart cherry juice. 1 ounce before you go to bed, 1 ounce when you wake up. It's supposed to help get your melatonin levels in sync. It's like, okay, I'll do that. Because I'm not a big proponent of taking drugs to fix the problem. Usually it's, huh? You tried it before? Did it work? Yep. So yeah, that's probably something you don't want to, yeah. Yeah, and sleeping pills are tough because when we talk about the brain and your different brain waves as you sleep, you go through different stages of sleep. And you do that twice during the night in an 8-hour cycle. Sleeping pills can mess you up as far as not going into those stages. So you fall asleep, but the restorative sleep that you're supposed to get, you don't get. Drink the cherry juice, see what happens. I don't know, I just started. It's good, it tastes like, you remember in the old days those little cherry pies from, I'm probably dating myself, but those horrible little cherry pies from, no, it wasn't Table Talk, it was, I can't remember. No, well, they're good, they're dyed some horrible red, but this, wow, I can't think of, Hostess, thank you, Hostess cherry pies. That's what this stuff tastes like. Yeah, it's pretty good. So try the cherry juice, see if it helps. See if it helps to regulate some of the different chemicals that help regulate you. So, thirst, water balance, hypothalamic function, sleep and awake cycles. The other big job that the hypothalamus has is to control the master gland of the endocrine gland. Now, why they call it the master gland, I don't know, because it's controlled by the hypothalamus. They should really call the hypothalamus the master, yes? So I say the hypothalamus is the master of the master. And who's that master endocrine gland? Nope. Pituitary gland. When we discuss the endocrine system, we'll discuss the pituitary gland and all the different hormones it secretes to help regulate body function. Well, the hypothalamus actually makes some hormones that are stored in the posterior pituitary gland that help to regulate body function. And the hypothalamus can give signals to the anterior pituitary gland to actually secrete those hormones. So again, we'll talk about that second semester. But it controls pituitary hormones as well. So hypothalamus, very busy. Epithalamus, the back end, most dorsal portion. This is where we're going to find our little friend, the pineal gland. The pineal gland is going to make melatonin. And melatonin is going to help control those sleep and awake cycles. So that little purple region there. Now we're moving down. Where are we going? You're going into the brain stem. So now we're going from purple to what? We're going into the green region. Oops, what am I doing? Oh, okay, I'm going in the right direction. All right, three different regions: brain stem, midbrain, pons, and my favorite word, medulla oblongata. This is where we say that lower brain function occurs, but this lower brain function is extremely important for your survival. Probably why we're designed the way we are, not probably why, but let's say the design is very good, that controls, protects those midbrain regions. Because I can still survive as long as I'm breathing and my heart is beating, and all of those things are kind of nestled in those little midbrain regions. So, brainstem, very similar in structure to the spinal cord. Most of it's going to be white matter. We have 10 to 12 pairs of cranial nerves that are going to come out of this. What are the cranial nerves doing? It wouldn't make sense to get information from the eye, then have it go down to the spinal cord, then back up to the brain, would it? Yeah, that's kind of wasting a little bit of time. So pretty much anything that comes from this region is going to travel through for processing in the brain via those cranial nerves. There is an exception to the rule, but we'll learn that when we learn the cranial nerves. So we'll see those little things that are sticking out that kind of look like wires? Those are some of the different cranial nerves we're going to have to learn. We see a big one up there, the optic nerve that actually comes from the two eyeballs and then crosses over for processing on either side of the occipital lobe of the brain. So we see some of the parts that we've discussed here in this underneath portion of the brain. And we can see a whole bunch of those cranial nerves in yellow and where they enter the brain stem. These pictures are on page 444 and 445 in your textbook. So between the Diencephalon and the Pons, we find the midbrain. Channels that connect third and fourth ventricle can be found through the midbrain. A whole bunch of different nuclei can be found in the midbrain. Contains a lot of motor tracts. What am I talking about when I say motor tracts? Information going where? From the brain to the peripheral nervous system, causing some sort of effect. So they talk about a whole bunch of different areas here, and we see some of these different motor tracts that are going to suppress pain, visual reflex, auditory reflex, basal nuclei, limbic system, awareness system. We see some connections between midbrain nuclei and that awareness function. The red nuclei is a big one that's going to help with organizing some descending motor pathways after we've processed, sending the information out so that there can be some sort of effect we find in the red nuclei. Again, you don't have to memorize this. This is a map of some of those different areas. When you become a brain surgeon, you'll have to know them all, and you'll have to know what they all do. Yes? But have an appreciation for how complex your nervous system is. Again, this is starting to look like what we're going to see when we see the spinal cord. And we can see where some of those cuts are coming from. So this is information that's feeding in from the spinal cord on some roads and feeding out from the brain through the spinal cord on other roads. And basically when we describe these different areas, they're just different areas, different tracks, different roads. Some of them have processing in them, but most of them are roads coming in and out. Yes? Now, it would be bad if I go out on the highway and we use one road for both directions. Yes? That would be a problem. That would be a problem in your nervous system, too. Remember, neurons can only go in one direction. Is that making sense? So when we discuss these different areas, we're discussing the organization of all these different pathways. Who's going where? What are they bringing stuff for? What's the result? Pons. As we go lower down, it's kind of a little bump before the medulla oblongata. We see there's a whole bunch of different fibers there. We're going to connect some of the higher brain centers in the spinal cord. We're going to see some cranial nerves coming out of the pons region. Cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal. Cranial nerve 6, the abducens. Why is she saying this? Because you're going to need to know them all. You're going to need to know all 12 cranial nerves by number and by name. And you're going to have to know what they do for a living. That's going to come in later chapters, but just prepping you now. And the facial, cranial nerve 7. We see some nuclei here for reticular formation. Again, that awareness road. And some nuclei here in the pons that are going to help with your breathing rhythm. Speed it up, slow it down. Why would I need to speed up and slow down my breathing? Yeah, when I don't have enough oxygen. Boy, they had some delicious things in the bookstore the other day. Now I need to control my breathing even more because the bookstore is so damn far away. So when I run to the bookstore now, holy moly, my breathing rate is going to go up. How come? When I run to the bookstore, they had chocolate brownies with mint chocolate stuff on the top. To die for. When I'm running, what am I doing? Huh? I use up more oxygen. Muscles are working harder. So what do you think the signal is to the pons for the breathing rate? Huh? More faster what? Does it know I'm moving my muscles? How does it know I'm moving my muscles? What happens to blood as I move my muscles? It pumps faster for the same reason you breathe faster. Muscles are contracting, using more of something. There'll probably be less of that in the circulatory system. Using more oxygen, yes. So all of these different brain regions get chemical signals. A lot of them are from what's in your circulatory system. Sometimes I can shoot chemicals into your circulatory system and affect your breathing rate. Did anybody ever get allergy shots or go through some sort of reaction to something where you're having trouble breathing? What do they do to you? Yeah, some of you, do anybody carry an EpiPen with them for allergy purposes? What is that stuff? What does it do? Anybody know? Well, it actually opens up tubes like your bronchioles if you're having trouble breathing. Yeah. It helps to open up those tubes that are constricting. So, yeah. So if you have asthma or allergies or something. So we get information about the rhythm of breathing from nuclei and fiber tracts in the pons. Again, as we work our way down, we see the pons and all of these little tracts. Again, I'm not going to make you memorize the tracts, but remember, these are all different pathways, going in, going out, sending information in and out from processing in the brain. Is this sounding a little bit more simple, hopefully? It's basically you just have to know the roads. So you're learning a road map when you learn this chapter. Where everything is and what everything is. You know, when I learn a new neighborhood, I move to a new place, I have to first know how to get there, right? And then is it worth me going there? You know, what's there? I have the dry cleaner, I have the supermarket, I have a restaurant. Yes? And that's basically what your nervous system is. Different places for different information and different roads to get to and from it. So we're talking more roads now, yes? There is some processing that goes on in these places, but most of them are roads. My favorite word in science, medulla oblongata. Joins the spinal cord at the foramen magnum. What is that? That's a big ass hole in the base of your skull. What goes in there? The spinal cord. Very good. Forms the part of the ventricle wall of the fourth ventricle that feeds down. Because remember, what are these ventricles doing for me? Not blood. Spinal fluid. And we have to get spinal fluid throughout the whole central nervous system. So the fourth ventricle is going to feed down into a central canal which feeds down through the spinal cord. Contains cells called the choroid plexuses. What the heck is a choroid plexus? Well, it's a group of cells and a bunch of blood vessels. The cells are called ependymal cells. And what do the ependymal cells do for a living? What the heck is an ependymal cell? They make spinal fluid. So the choroid plexuses are groups of ependymal cells and blood vessels. Why do you think the two go hand in hand? What do I make spinal fluid from? Blood, right? Part of blood is plasma. So the ependymal cells are getting the stuff they need, sucking it out of the plasma and doing what? Creating cerebrospinal fluid into the ventricles. So we see choroid plexuses in these areas. They're not only in the fourth ventricle, they're in other places. And then we see different crossovers. Crossover cortico-spinal tracts, communications for left and right side of the brain. So these are different relay stations, this olivary nuclei that are going to control things like muscles and joints. The cerebellum we're going to see is sort of our coordinator guy. He's going to help coordinate movement by sending information through the medulla oblongata via the cerebellum to help coordinate muscle movements, joint movements. We see some cranial nerves, cranial nerve 8, 9, 10, and what? 12. I know they're Roman numerals. X is 10. V is 5. If you put a 1 before the V, that's 4. If you put a 1 after the V, that's 6. If you put a 1 before the X, that's 9. If you put a 1 after the X, it's 11. So we just learned Roman numerals. Pons and medulla mediate responses that maintain equilibrium, balance. Why do I need to be balanced? Yeah, falling over is bad. We need to move through space as humans, so we need to be able to coordinate movements and coordinate balance. These areas are going to help us with this. Also, relay areas for sensory information.
When you get your ears flushed, is it because you're holding your equilibrium really well? Is that because the fluid's going in?
Information coming from cranial nerve 8, the vestibulocochlear cranial nerve 8. A part of that division is coming in for information processing with respect to balance. So if there's, and when we talk about special senses next semester, we'll talk about these guys. But if there's a disruption in the fluid that moves through these little canals in the inner ear that is sending messages through this relay station for coordinated movement, we might have problems with balance. Does that make more sense now? So that information, the sensory information, is actually coming from the inner ear. This is just a roadway to send that information for processing. Autonomic reflex centers are also found in the medulla oblongata. What's autonomic reflex centers? Something that happens what? Automatically, right? So we see autonomic reflex centers in the hypothalamus. We automatically do the movement part, but then we're aware of what we did, right? So when we have reflexes, even we saw that simple reflex arc in the previous chapter, talked about the 5 different parts. We have some sort of sensor that sends sensory information in. Then we have some sort of interneuron that sends information to motor, and then we have some sort of effect. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? A yes, a head nod, something would be, yeah, good, good. Where was I going with this? Oh, not only do we have to send that information, the reflex information have to do its little thing in the reflex arc, but we also have to send information up for processing, which makes us aware of what just happened, aware of we just pulled our hand away from the hot stove, or aware of we just pulled away our hand from something sharp. So these are areas that are going to send that information up for processing in the cerebral cortex. So not only does that interneuron hand information to motor to cause an effect, but it also hands off information that causes it to go for processing in the cerebral cortex. So this is where we see that overlap of function. Also, we find cardiovascular centers here. This is going to help us with our heart rate, adjust force and rate of heart contraction. Vasomotor center. What the heck does that mean? Some sort of vessels. What are we talking about when we talk cardiovascular system? Blood vessels, like what? Veins and arteries, and they have to move blood through the system at certain rates. Again, I'm running to the bookstore. I need to get more blood where? Well, my lungs, yes, and who else? To my muscles, to get the oxygen that's going to be contained in that blood to the muscles. So this is going to regulate the different blood flow. If I have a tube that's this wide versus a tube that's that wide, blood is going to flow at a different rate. Yes? So if I control the blood vessels and how fat they are, I'm going to control the flow. Anybody water plants in their yard? Nobody waters plants in their yard. Holy moly. All right, I'm cheap. I have a bush that's a little further away from the hose, but I don't want to buy one of those fancy little what's-this nozzles. So I have my hose. What do? Put my thumb on it. Why do I put my thumb on it? It changes the diameter of the tube, yes? And what happens? The pressure is still pushing that water at a certain pressure. Yeah, when I narrow those tubes, it's going to flow faster and push it what? Push it further in the same time frame. So vasomotor is also an important part of the medulla oblongata with respect to cardiovascular function. Because cardiovascular is not only the heart, but the blood vessels as well. And then the other thing it does is helps with the respiratory center. And that's going to help generate the whole rhythm, breathing rhythm. Controls the rate and depth of breathing. Also, additional centers can be found here in the medulla oblongata. When we talk about the respiratory system, we'll revisit this list again. Vomiting, what's that? Yeah, reverse peristalsis. So we're pushing the tubes in the opposite direction, which isn't pleasant, yes? Hiccuping, swallowing, coughing, sneezing are all regulated here in the medulla oblongata. Again, cross-section of the medulla oblongata sees what? A whole bunch of different names and a whole bunch of different roads and a whole bunch of different pathways. Again, when you become the brain surgeon, you're going to need to know all of these, where they are and what they do. The scary thing for the brain surgeon is not everybody's got the same roadmap. Yes? So get out your clickers. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of brain mapping was done when we first developed the technology of brain surgery, because you could touch different areas and elicit different memories. Yeah. Yeah, I feel this, I feel it in my hand, I feel it in my leg, or I smell this, or I hear this. So yeah, it's crazy. So the Pons belongs to which major brain region? Oops. Is the sign-in sheet going around? Where is it? Who's got it? Oh, pass it around, girl. Who didn't sign it? Oh, this little group down here. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.5. What's the answer? You think? Everybody said brainstem? Very good. Brain contains how many ventricles? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many? 4. Ooh, I bet you we get 100. You think? Oh. E. There is no E. You can push it twice, you know, your clicker. What's going to register is the last thing you push. So if you push it 10 times, the last thing that's going to register is the last button you push. So if you make a mistake and I'm still timing, you can change it. Next, the blank of the brain is located, or is the location of our conscious mind. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. What's the answer? Cerebral cortex. That's where our file cabinets are, yes? Conscious mind. Now the limbic system and the reticular activating system, they're sending information to open up the drawers, yes? If you try to make this stuff, compare it to something that you understand, yes? Everybody knows what a file cabinet is. Everybody understands what files are, roads to a house in a neighborhood. All of those things will help this make more sense. Yes? Hopefully. 11% cerebellum. We haven't talked about it yet, but huh? Oh, this is, yeah, okay, never mind, it's not a question. Duh. It's a good thing you guys know. Okay, stop it. All right, 11% of the brain mass. Dorsal to the pons, what's that? What's dorsal? Yeah, behind. That dorsal fin on a what? On a shark. Input from the cortex, brainstem, sensory receptors. This is a coordination guy. What happens, has anybody ever been whacked in the back of the head really hard? Playing football or falling off of something and smacking your head? You get up and, yeah, exactly. You have trouble coordinating movements. So we see a lot of white matter here. We see white matter and gray matter here in the cerebellum. When you dissect your brain this semester, you're going to see white matter and gray matter. It's very, very vivid. The white matter in the cerebellum looks like a tree. It's a tree-like pattern. And it was named by the first anatomists as the tree of life. Arbor vitae. 3 different lobes, anterior, posterior, and one called the flocculonodular. And then it's separated into 2 hemispheres by something called the vermis. So see that little white tree-like structure? You can see it best on page 448 in your textbook. We see white matter tracks from a whole bunch of different areas, helping to coordinate movement. This is a nice little picture of that as well. And again, we see the connection between those central brain white matter tracks and the cerebellum. This little picture, similar to the one we saw of the cerebral cortex, shows us what parts of the cerebellum are responsible for what parts of the body. So if I'm looking at this, and if you look in your textbook, you'll see that it's what view? Or where's the anterior, where's the posterior, basically? Anterior is at the top, posterior is at the bottom. So the posterior cerebellum is going to control coordination of hands and feet, your extremities. The anterior cerebellum is going to control whole body. So it's going to have a hand in mostly central body regions, but it's also going to control a little bit of hands and leg function as well. So different parts connect cerebellum to the midbrain, connect the pons to the cerebellum, and connect the medulla to the cerebellum as well. So this is just some of the different paired tracks we're going to find in the cerebellum. All fibers in the cerebellum are ipsilateral. What the heck does that mean? It's not contralateral, it's ipsilateral. You learn, we're doing a little English lesson. Yeah, so right controls right and left controls left. So impulses from the cerebral cortex with respect to voluntary muscle contraction. Also proprioceptors and visual receptors, equilibrium. Proprioceptor, those are the guys in the inner ear that are going to help us control what? Balance. So position, momentum, movement, coordination, all think of that when you think cerebellum. Movements that you do a lot, coordinated, repetitive movements are stored here as well. So things like what? Coordinated, repetitive movements. Give me some examples. Driving a car, riding your bike, typing, playing an instrument. So we have storage in the cerebellum for that. So that's what some of that gray matter is that we see in the cerebellum. Those movements that we do constantly. We weren't always able to do those, were we? We had to make files for those, didn't we? Where are those files? Some of the files are in the cerebellum. Okay? Also, some of the cognitive functions, the awareness functions of the cerebellum, language, emotion, helps us sit and think, output, adjustment accordingly. So, intensity of things. When I need to beef something up or slow something down. If I need to make sure you can hear me at the back of the room, I have to make sure that I project my voice louder for you to hear me. Can you hear me today, by the way? Good. Okay? That's not the end. That's the end of the first PowerPoint. It was so long that I had to make two. So how are we doing? So, different networks of neurons that are going to help connect some of these areas that we talked about. We've already mentioned them before, but let's talk a little bit more about them in detail. They are the limbic system and the reticular activating system. They're going to be widespread tracts throughout the brain. Again, refer back to that diagram with all those little tracts that we see on page 438 and 439 in your textbook. So, the limbic system includes parts of the diencephalon, so we already talked about it. We find some in the brainstem, and we find some spread throughout. This is sort of a little bit of a roadmap of where we find some of these cells and nuclei in the limbic system. You can see this diagram on page 449 in your textbook. So what's the limbic system for? Emotion. Why are emotions important? Yeah, sometimes we're a little over-emotional, but they're going to help what? What are emotions for? Yeah, help us react to different situations in our environment, okay? Anger, fear, facial expressions. We as humans look at a lot of cues. Well, some of us do. Some of us ignore all the cues and don't pay any attention to them. But if you say, what do you want for dinner? And then the person you said, what do you want for dinner for says, I don't know, anything. And then you say, okay, I'm going to make my tofu casserole, which is very good, by the way. But I'm pretending that the other person doesn't like it, and they go. That should be something I should pick up on and say, oh, what's the matter? You don't want tofu casserole? Maybe we'll have something else. Yes? So this is where we are able to recognize some of those signals. Assess danger. Some of us don't have good processing in our amygdaloid bodies of the limbic system. So we ignore danger and fear and just go and do it anyway. Gestures, mental conflict. Some of us have overactive limbic systems and lose lots of sleep at night, yes? Thinking about, oh, what if this happens and what if that happens, yes? Mostly it's women. The guys tend to sleep pretty well. Women that have had children, even worse. You'll go through all the horrible scenarios that could possibly happen to that child in your head while you're trying to sleep. Overactive, cingulate gyrus. Emotional responses to odors. That's important. Don't be eating something that's been in the refrigerator for 700 years and is fuzzy. Yes? Skunk. Bad smell. Don't go there. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. So smells, for example, and emotions and odors are very important in the animal world. We don't pay as much attention to them because we don't get as much information, but they do help protect us from harm. Limbic system's going to interact with prefrontal lobes, emotions, conscious awareness, the hippocampus, memory. So those are some of the things I want you to remember about the limbic system. Now, who's next? The reticular formation. Kind of in the same area, we have groups of nuclei that are going to stretch through central brain regions and connect to cortical regions as well. And again, when you think reticular formation, think of awareness and arousal, up and going and moving and being aware of your surroundings. The RAS, or reticular activating system, is groups of nuclei that are going to help take stimuli from the environment and make you aware of your environment. Believe it or not, it filters out a lot of information. Remember I gave you that little scenario about what was going on while you were sitting in your seat the other day? And if you had a ponytail and the light is going on and there's pressure on your butt and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, if you were aware of all of that stimuli, what would happen to you? Totally overwhelmed, yes? So the reticular activating system also helps with awareness, but also helps to filter out the overstimulus in our environment. Some people have a problem with the reticular activating system group of nuclei, and they can't filter out all of that stimuli. And we also mentioned that in class last time as well. And inhibited by sleep centers, alcohol, drugs. What happens sometimes when we drink too much alcohol? We fall down. Maybe not quite as aware of our surroundings as we should be. Of course, drugs are illegal, so nobody does any of that in here. Injuries can be permanent. When you're in a coma, your reticular activating system tends to be deadened. Now, all the other stuff is working depending on what type of coma you're in. And sometimes we can actually give you drugs that will make you go into a coma. Why?
It makes it, well, they gave it to me to help get me out of the pack because I was combative.
But it helps your body to do what? Heal. Okay, so slow down a lot of that stimulus so that your body can take care of healing. So patients are put into comas on purpose sometimes when they go through major trauma. Motor function, reticular activating and motor function is also one of the jobs of the reticular activating system. Helps to control large limb movement, vasomotor centers. Again, that was your blood vessels, cardiovascular rhythm, cardiac centers, and who else? Respiratory. So these are some of the automatic regulating visceral motor functions that have nuclei included in the reticular activating system. Again, you see these arrows, it's sort of widespread. I can't go in and grab my reticular activating system and take it out. You see what I'm saying? Because it's so widespread throughout the brain regions, both central brain regions and higher brain regions. Whew. So you got that? Good. So now, can I measure what's going on in the brain? Sort of, kind of. And what kind of measurements do I take? Yeah, remember, a nerve impulse is what? It's an electrical event. So we have, through science, developed a whole bunch of different things to map those electrical events in different ways. We can look at what's going on in the brain by looking at the heat signature those electrical events leave behind. We can actually go in and measure the electrical events. You know, those cute little depolarization, repolarization peaks. And what this test does, and what is this test called? It's called an EEG, or electroencephalogram. We actually look at some of the different electrical events that are going on in the body. We can actually measure those electrical potentials, and we can see tracings of them. Anybody ever have a sleep test? Yeah? Sleep disorders, different brain disorders, or suspect of any brain disorders, or trying to test to see if there's normal function. There's a certain amount of waves in certain, for seizures, brain dysfunctions. We can look at brain waves that should be normal and in certain patterns when we do these studies. When we put electrodes to the head, we can actually measure these waves or brain activity. So in this diagram that we see on page 453, we can see some of the different brain wave patterns. What are you going to have to know about them? Know them by name and know what they mean. Boy, this would make a nice essay question. Just throwing that out there. So alpha. How many of you are in alpha right now? Yes, probably most of you are. It's the only place on campus that has heat today, so enjoy it. If you're going into Jalbert, don't forget your coat. It's cold in there. Yeah, cold where? Yeah. They're having some issues with the heat. You're either going to be freezing there or you're going to be sweating your keister up. So dress in layers this week when you go to Jalbert. So we see alpha waves, which are awake but relaxed. Guess what? Guess when your learning and memory is most effective? When you have majority of your waves being what? Alpha. When you stress out, learning and memory have a hard time happening. So when you learn, what should you be in? A nice, relaxed state. Open-minded. Not panting and breathing hard and stressing yourself out. One of the best ways to learn is just before you do what?
Sleep.
Fall asleep. Unfortunately, some of us fall asleep before the learning and memory take place. So this is where, remember my trick with the tape recorder I told you about? One of the things I did to study when I was trying to finish my master's degree, did I tell you this story? One of the ways that I learned, one of the ways I had to study, because I didn't have time to sit down and read the book. I had to feed those kids. Don't know why. They probably would have put me in jail if I did. So I had to do things around my house. I couldn't sit and study. So what I did was I made a tape recording of all the things that I had to study, like this, for example. And I listened to it over and over and over and over again. Because what else is going to help with learning and memory? Repetition, repetition, repetition. Yeah? And I would even put it on as I was falling asleep. I'd wake up and, I'd be talking to myself. I got my master's degree. Guess what my grade point average was? I'm bragging a little. 4.0. Yeah. Don't ask me what my undergraduate degree's grade point average was. I graduated summa cum laude from my undergraduate degree. All right, so we'll pick up with brain waves on Thursday.